Everyone, this is update for April 20, 2023, day 421 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up update for April 19. So I'm just going to start really quickly with a quick update on what's going on in the financial system in the US. So this is the latest numbers that came out, I believe on actually April 19. I actually made mistake here, but so as you can see, there's little bit increase in stress. So the trend seems to be a little bit reversing. So you can see it's almost 70 billion borrowed on the primary credit, and then 74 on the bank term funding program. So all of those stresses are not going away, which is not surprise because interest rates are not going down, and it looks like Federal Reserve in US is not going to be on pause or even reduce interest rates. Looks like they early, I think May 1 or May 2, they're going to increase interest rate by another 25 basis points, which will add to the stress in the banking system in the US. However, as you can see, the demand for US dollars is down. There's less stress internationally. The FX repos, only 20 billion is outstanding. Also, the confirmation that the stress is rising. You see that interest rate on the bank term funding program is going up. I think it's highest it's ever been since the sort of instituting of this program. I think it was like mid March. So this is the highest rate so far. So it's very clearly that that tension, the problems are sort of slowly rising up again. We'll see where it all leads, but this crisis is not over, and as long as interest rates are staying where they are in the US, this will create more problems down the road throughout the year, and may lead to another, 2008 type of crisis in the US, and then obviously it will hit the world. Now let's actually move back to our favorite topic, which is China, US, Taiwan, all of those places, and this time it's going to be from US perspective. So US has conducted war games in a lower chamber of US Parliament, where the conclusion was that Taiwan doesn't have enough weapons, which I guess nobody's surprised about that, specifically rockets or missiles. However, the most concerning actually takeaway from that, which was not very sort of was not highlighted really, is that essentially at the beginning, the expectation from the US side is that Taiwan is going to be essentially blocked and encircled, and from the very beginning of the invasion. So basically, what's going to happen is that Chinese Navy was going to, create blockade of Taiwan, which is, if you really think about how this is going to play out, the first they're going to blockade Taiwan from what I think it's east here, from the eastern side, from blockade from Japan and South Korea, and then from Philippines, and then I think Guam is somewhere there. So essentially, they're gonna blockade, and then they're gonna be sort of attacking with the landing forces, obviously across this strait. So the expectation in the U.S. essentially is that the U.S. fleet will not be able to do much about it, and it's essentially gonna be left sort of like a which is like a Nazi Germany times called fortress, to kind of like for basically doing delaying action, sort of killing itself in attempt to delay attack. So this essentially looks like it's going to be fate of Taiwan. That's based on this takeaway, based on this war game. Also related to when we're talking about this Pacific. If you remember, I mentioned that Russia had military exercises of the entire Pacific Fleet, which was finished a day or a couple days ago. As a result of that, the commander of the Russian Pacific Fleet was dismissed, and there will be new commander. So basically, apparently, Russian leadership was not happy with what they learned, with what they saw there, and the result are actions. And why it's important is because it's clearly, confirming is that Russian leadership is willing to make changes and address problems, and that really makes them sort of more dangerous enemy because they don't keep people who don't perform. That's first thing, and then second, obviously, that there is realization there is some gaps there, and they will be closed eventually. It's probably not going to happen overnight, but there will be work done. So again, that's definitely on the negative side. Then a little bit sort of switching to military-industrial complex in the West, and my conclusion is that it's very sick, very monopolized, and not capable to deliver in case of large-scale military conflict between the West and, let's say, China and Russia. It's just going to be it's actually, I would say, it's a the monopolization is probably the biggest concern for the security of the West relative to everything else. Because so here I give you a couple examples. So in France, Nexter is essentially national monopoly for manufacturing all sorts of military equipment, and they try to increase production of 155 millimeter shells, including obviously supplying to Ukraine, and they cannot do it because of the supply bottlenecks. And basically, they say, well, we don't have enough gunpowder to do it. So again, the plan is essentially failed without even, they just started it, and immediately they couldn't execute on that. Then let's move to the U.S. So U.S. Example is Javelin missiles, right, and then HIMARS missiles. I don't know which one produced by Lockheed Martin, but Lockheed Martin essentially said we cannot increase. They made commitment in 2022 that they're going to increase production and so on, and now they're backing out, saying like, well, we also have supply bottlenecks, and I think they're in that case it's more rocket motors that's a problem, and so they say, well, we probably won't be able to deliver what we promised. So again, this is the problem is not really this bottlenecks are just a sort of symptom, or all of the supply bottlenecks. The true root cause of all of this is extreme monopolization of this military production in the West, and in this hopefully conflict that will never happen, the one who realizes that entrepreneurship and private initiative is the answer, is the solution, that's who is going to win. And China in this respect is extremely shrewd, and that's why China is capable to produce a lot of military equipment at this point, is because a lot of it is being done by private companies, or the components are being provided by many private companies, which is like sort of like huge ecosystem, right? So if one falls out, immediately you have new ones and better ones. There is competition, and that's sort of the source of the progress. And unfortunately, looks like West forgot what it is, and as a result is not capable to even produce, even if it wants. Russia is sort of will never sort of wake up. They will always sort of continue their monopolized system. They just not able to function any different way. The competition is a foreign word in Russia, let's put this way. So there's no concern about Russia that it's going to be able to sort of be dangerous in this respect. Then Chinese military industrial complex is making huge progress. Now they are going to be supplying to United Arab Emirates. It's infantry fighting vehicle. It's called VN-20. That's essentially equivalent of the Russian BMP-3. It's fairly modern system, fairly capable. I mean, it's not, it has, armor that's able to withstand only 30 millimeter armor piercing rounds, but that's, they're not supposed to sort of withstand sort of tank rounds or anything stronger than that. That's just support, and at the same time, it's, I have big questions whether they're truly needed on the battlefield, or they just essentially perfect way, good way, well, not good way, but like a way to die horrible deaths on the battlefield. Basically, kamikaze tools. Nevertheless, so as I said, China is definitely closing on its hold over this whole Persian Gulf from all perspective, from being the buyer of the key commodity there, crude oil, and supplying military, supplying support. So effectively, at this point, China has replaced the role of the U.S. in the Persian Gulf, and I think this is huge loss for the West as a whole. That's not fully realized what's being lost, but eventually, once the realization comes, it might be too late, and the price will be very high and horrific. Let's put it this way. Related to all of this is, for example, in terms of energy, if we switch a little bit to energy, so like in Netherlands, price for electricity was negative couple times during the past couple days. It's because of oversupply of so-called alternative or green energy. Again, some people may see it as positive. I just want to say this is another negative where there is because it creates huge oscillation up and down in prices, and because there is no effective way to store this energy. So this really creates, as a whole, for electrical system, for basically for end users, which is industry and consumers, it's nearly impossible to function from a business perspective when the prices are oscillating so widely. It's actually, again, showing extremely negative. It's a negative of this so-called alternative energy or green energy, whatever you call, which is, it's not green and it's not alternative, but it's another example of why it's not working, and it's not going to working, and all it can do is really destroy the economies of the West. Then another topic is actually Russia and export of Russian crude oil. So Russia starting exporting its crude oil to Pakistan, which is here next to India. They're going to be exporting 100,000 barrels per day. So that's another consumer. We all know that China, India buying a lot, Turkey is buying a lot, even Persian Gulf is buying a lot, specifically Saudi Arabia, which is extremely clear that they basically buying to resell it basically to the West, and that's where the crude oil goes. So as you can see, all of the sanctions against crude oil just simply don't work, because it's a hot commodity, everybody needs it, it's extremely liquid, and the sanctions will never work, let's put it this way. The more interesting part of all of this is that Pakistan is supplying 155 millimeter shells to Ukraine, and Russia doesn't mind it. It's, when it comes to money, who cares, right? So it's all, again, speaks quite a bit about the motivation for this war also from the Russian side, right? Where it's just, we're waging this ideological war against the West, and Ukraine is as sort of part of the West, but the reality is, it's in the end, it boils down it's all about the money in the end. The other, in sort of, again, Russia and sort of Asia, is Turkey. And Russia is actually working with Turkey to be basically to make Turkey as uh, kind of like a transmission or bridge between the Western financial system and Russia. So essentially, basically, kind of like pay some kind of fee to Turkey, Turkish banks, Turkish financial system. So it acts as intermediary and allows Russia to basically function from a financial perspective and so on. So, and by the way, I think it wasn't very widely publicized uh, in the West, but there was a speech by the Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs where he was extremely critical of the West. Specifically, he picked up on the U.S. He was openly saying that the rest of the world hates U.S. and so on. So I would say that this sort of thoughts that he expressed, he was probably more open and what's really a lot of countries in Asia and in Africa thinking, but not really speaking up, not speaking loudly. So this again sort of highlights the problems that West is really facing, and I think those problems are not fully realized in the West, where there is sort of thinking that the perception of the West is sort of universally positive everywhere, and it will be some point might be rude awakening when people realize in the West that actually the perception is completely opposite of what people think in the West. Um, and then I just want to mention a little bit about um, Russian digital currency, digital ruble. So so this is for those who believe that Russia is Russian, leadership, political leadership. Russian president is really fighting all of the, big government that's sort of that you see in the West, and he's really fighter for freedom and so on. The Russian system is not no such thing, and they just cleverly use this false narrative that they push in the West, that they are pro family, pro conservative values and so on. It's definitely not the case, and the digital currency in Russia that's starting be sort of operational, I think, in couple weeks, is showing that, and essentially the way it's going to function is that the government allows you to have the digital wallet of 300,000 rubles per month that you can spend, but you cannot have more than that. So it exactly confirms all of the, I would say, concerns about the digital currency as a tool for oppression, and that's exactly how it's being started to be used in Russia. And I'll provide more sort of updates as saying more things emerge. And so far, everybody's saying, well, it's voluntary. You're not required to participate in it if you don't want, and so on. But I'm pretty certain that everybody will be forced to be in this system essentially. Then another interesting part of the sort of big, let's say, big brother and big sister in Russia. So Moscow and St. Petersburg, they have extensive network of surveillance cameras on the streets everywhere, essentially, especially in the center of the cities, and especially obviously in Moscow, where you constantly being monitored when you walk in the city. And so what's going to be done is that there will be face recognition software, AI, basically installed behind those cameras. Essentially will be processing all of those images to detect people who are supposed to be drafted to the army and sort of catch and find them as soon as possible, essentially. So this is again going back to all of this conservative values that being sort of pushed in the West, that Russia is supportive of conservative values. It's again there is no such thing. In Russia, it's It's 1984 on steroids. Probably not as on steroids as in China, but not far away. And there's a reason why Russia, used to be the communist country, and China is communist country, and Russia largely it is sort of hybrid of communism with some elements of sort of state-run capitalism. So again, um, you know, at the same time, as I said, Russia is trying to divide the West by using this, false narrative that they are sort of for conservative values and they are sort of defender of conservative values, which are being lost in the West and so on. And as I said, there is no such. They definitely not sort of. That's not their goal. The meaning that they are not defending those values by any means. Then related to Russia, it looks like there is coordinated effort to limit ability of Russian citizens to avoid sanctions. So the banks in Georgia, which is this small country in Caucasus, where there's a lot of Russian immigrants moved since the beginning of the war. Then Cyprus is another popular destination for Russians. And then UAE, which is here, is another one, third popular destination. So some banks in those countries are starting to either limit the use of bank accounts or even outright shut down, close bank accounts for Russian citizens. And obviously, this is as a result of pressure from the West and probably from the US. Going back actually to US, I would say one interesting sort of news is that the head of US was Department of Treasury, which is effectively Minister of Finance. She said that the economic breakup with China would be catastrophic for the US, which is definitely true, and that's in some ways it's inevitable. So it just this is going to be very, I would say, difficult for everyone in difficult situation, and we'll see how it's all going to play out. But both countries are very clearly on collision course, and the result of economic breakup of with China for the US is going to be definitely very bad economically, where the standard of living will easily drop by 2 times and could be potentially by 3 times, which is not really realized in the US, where there's people pushing, okay, let's make whatever in the US. They don't realize that will cost 3-4 times what they pay right now, or maybe even more, 5 times, because there is a reason why things have been sort of outsourced and offshored, if not to China, to the rest of the world, is because it's not competitive to produce in the US. And there need to be change in economic policy and everything in the US in order to be competitive. The same goes true for Europe, by the way, except there is more sort of a little bit more industry left in Germany, France, and Netherlands, and UK. Then actually going back to this whole industry and the government intervention and desire to create this semiconductor industry, where governments in China, European Union, and US woke up and decided that we want to build this huge semiconductor manufacturing industries in our countries by basically subsidizing or basically investing government's money into this manufacturing facilities. And in this case, for example, China is investing 74 billion US dollars in semiconductor manufacturing. Europe is investing 47 billion and wants to also have like 20% of market share. US did this like into 2022 by giving all of this subsidies to Intel and so on. What will come out of this will be huge disaster for all of these countries, including China, EU, and US. It will be not much to show for all of this wasted money. And Russia is a prime example, because they went along this path way ahead of all of these three countries, and there was tons of money invested, and it was all misused, stolen, abused, and so on. And there's nothing to show. Russia does not have any advanced semiconductor manufacturing, even right now, even in these difficult conditions. So again, all of this will result to basically huge waste and nothing to show, because semiconductor manufacturing is, let's say, activity that requires private initiative. Without private initiative, private capital, entrepreneurship, it's not going to work. And there's a reason why Taiwan is leader and South Korea is another one behind it, is because it's largely it's a private initiative. That's what won. That's why Taiwan is leader, because it's all private entrepreneurs and entrepreneur who basically won the competition, and that's the only way to go forward. And unfortunately, all of these countries don't really understand that. I'm not surprised by China, which is sort of normal thinking there. Especially they're going back to more sort of centralized, more sort of centrally planned communist approach. So that's not surprising, and obviously Russia not surprising. It's more surprising that US and EU are following in the footsteps of these countries. In terms of actually economic situation in the US and China, it's actually deteriorating. And the reason I'm saying it, if we look at the tax receipts in both countries, in China and US, they're going down. So which obviously, as you can imagine, people pay less taxes when they earn less income or net income. So then they pay less taxes. So this just confirms general sort of understanding that China is in difficult economic condition, and US is going that direction because of the high interest rates in the US. So they both going kind of like in the same direction, and this again goes back to this whole replay of the 1930s, where this economic depression effectively brought about World War II. And hopefully somehow this is not going to happen this time around, because it's very clear where it all goes if it goes on its own. But we'll find out. Then there's another news is the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock. I mentioned this. She went on a visit to Asia, to Far East, and one of the stops was China. And then she reported back in Germany that she was very shocked after her visit when she realized that China is not anymore partner or competitor. It's basically adversary, and that was a shock for her. I'll be honest, I'm surprised that she was so aware, that she was asleep at the wheel all this time. She needed really to go, in April, to realize what's been going on for the past, 10, 15, 20 years. And it's unfortunately the reality, probably in the West, that most of the politicians only now waking up to what's really been going on for over past really 20 years. Then another last news is that it looks like the Russian president's visit to China is confirmed. Let's say more than 90% probability confirmed. And he's going to visit China in May. Not clear exactly the dates, but looks like there is this sort of, the Russian president is sort of returning sort of the favor in going to China pretty soon. Again, it's not 100% confirmed, but a very high probability. I would say more than 90%. Now let's actually move to Ukraine. The first thing I would like to mention is Ukraine now getting loans from International Monetary Fund (IMF), which is in itself organization that really never helped basically any country to get out of troubles and basically put them more troubles. And in this case, what they do, they lend money to Ukraine at 6.9% interest rate, which is is really mind-boggling, I would say, because obviously Ukraine has virtually no economic output to pay back those loans. So it's very unclear what IMF is thinking when they lend money at such high interest rate. Let's put it this way. I mean, in any case, Ukraine, even before the war, it was settled with too much debt because of the basically financial irresponsibility since like early 2000s by all of the Ukrainian governments that sort of were. They essentially, borrowed the money, stole the money and then left, and then new comes, and this is kind of like revolving door of white collar corruption in the Ukrainian top. And so again, and all of these loans from IMF were really helping that white collar corruption in Ukraine, and this is just this approach essentially continues, where Ukraine really cannot have many more loans; it's simply unable to pay them, and the right outcome for Ukraine is to default on all those loans and write them off, because essentially they were like most of those loans were embezzled by the top politician that were in charge of Ukraine in the moments when those loans were taking. So again, this is mind-boggling when you sort of realize that. Then I want to mention one thing about this Zaporizhya nuclear power plant, which is actually in Enerhodar, which is where I'm showing it. So it looks like it was switched to the Western-produced fuel. Westinghouse was supplying fuel, so basically, it's a Soviet-built nuclear power plant. So it was using Soviet uranium rods that obviously Russia now produces, but then sometime, I don't know exactly when, it was switched to Westinghouse in attempt to move away from Russian supply and Russian interference. So now what happens there is there's obviously some software in the nuclear plant, because it's using Westinghouse made roads. So there's obviously U.S. made software. Westinghouse is the U.S. company, and obviously Russia has access to that software at this point. I think it should be no surprise that Russia will probably rip it, will be able to investigate it, learn it, and so on, and that probably will create vulnerabilities for the West, where Russia probably can do hack attacks against the Western nuclear power plants, the ones that specifically where Westinghouse provided sort of software and other equipment, essentially. So this opens up another hole in the Western sort of defenses, and that's what's really happening there at this moment. But basically, what Russia also doing, they removing this Westinghouse fuel rods and software, and they putting back old Soviet ones, which is now labeled as Russians. So that's what's really going on there. Now let's actually do a walk through the front line. We're gonna start in a clockwise fashion, starting from the very north along the state border situation, more or less the same, meaning it's I would say highly intense. There are some Ukrainian attacks on the Russian side, and then obviously retaliation attacks from the Russian side on the Ukrainian side, and but essentially, there is nothing sort of earth moving or nothing really worthwhile there. Now let's move to North Lugansk front line. Things here essentially quieted. This is confirms what I've been saying for probably past more than a week. I would say is that both sides don't have enough resources to do active warfare on this front, on this section of the front line, and the most important part is the shortage, severe shortage of artillery shells on both sides, and essentially freezes conflict in a sort of natural way. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. Things here also essentially most of it is frozen. The only active area is Bahmut. And what's really, I'm actually going to go here. What's really happening here is that, as I said before, Russian side essentially captured all of this core of Bahmut along, with the railroad being sort of dividing lines, and essentially Russian side captured some bridgeheads on their western side of the railroad. So they basically creating launch pads to continue attacks, and they actually also made some progress here in the northern side, on the northern flank of the town. So essentially, Ukrainian troops are being sort of slowly squeezed. They do some counterattacks there, and it's not a straight sort of line for the Russian side. As they say, they do 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and so on. But they slowly, very, very slowly and steadily moving forward. And at the same time, the speed has really reduced to capturing a building is becoming sort of the achievement for the day. So again, the ability of Russian side to really capture the remaining western outskirts of Bakhmut is, I would say, is not guaranteed. It's a big question whether they willing to commit enough resources to do that, because essentially it's a bridge to nowhere, right? It's you capture and then what, like, why do you gonna expend so much resources, and specifically artillery shells, which Russia has a shortage of, just essentially to make a propaganda action, and so we'll see where it all leads. But so far, they're still putting pressure, but the Russian side is completely, I would say, exhausted there. It doesn't, Ukrainian side is also bleeding badly. There's always reports of some, company commander or even battalion commander or even some like deputy of the brigade commander getting killed every other day. So which also, shows that the stresses are extreme on the Ukrainian side. So, it's turning into battle of the will on the both sides, and it's really a toss of a coin where which one will win. But that's just the latest there. Essentially, it's if it's not stalemate, it's such a slow move forward by Russian side that it may take easily another months to get control of Bakhmut for the Russian side, unless things change somehow drastically, which is unclear at this point. So this is just quickly we're gonna go through the progress of it, which, as you can see, it's at this point more than 2 months. And since the start of the assault on Bakhmut, and there is not much to show for it yet. Meaning there is something to show, but the town is not captured by the Russian side. Again, this is the same big picture. There was some also pressure on the northern flank, which resulted in some Russian advances, but at the same time they not critical at this point, and it doesn't look like they will lead to sort of any success on the Russian side. As I said, just want to confirm that Wagner mercenaries are expanded at this point from all intents and purposes, and not capable to do much. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things here are more or less the same. Continued Russian attacks in the same places, same three places. Really not much changes here without really much success. Just continuation of the same, essentially. In terms of Ukrainian probing attacks, and actually move to Zaporizhya front line, because then we can see the entire sort of front section of the front here. So there's nothing, no new attacks here near Rihiu, where I reported there were probing attacks from Ukrainian side, and then there were probing attacks around Vuhledar from Ukrainian side. So far, it's all, both locations are quiet again. Not much is happening. The weather conditions are still pretty bad, and I explained I think in the previous video, where it's extremely difficult to move, especially for the wheeled vehicles in these conditions, because the soil in turning into this not a swamp, but sort of similar to swamp. In some way, it's very different than swamp, but this the soil becomes very wet, and it's turning. You're just getting stuck there, and so it's still pretty wet, and probably will take probably couple weeks to dry up to the reasonable level. Assuming, and it looks like the rain, this sort of, call it rain season, is about to stop. It's not really rain season, but there's just this non-stop rain is coming to the end, and so the conditions on the ground will slowly improve over, let's say, from in about a week or two time frame. I don't think there will be much action until the situation on the ground improves, because it's just simply nearly impossible to be successful attacking in such conditions. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.